Hey guys, how's it going? Delrith here, bringing you another rapid fire style review, this time for the game Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro is a third-person combat action RPG developed by FromSoftware, a company well known for making Dark Souls and inspiring the seemingly never-ending barrage of Souls-like games. Luckily, if you were hoping that Sekiro wouldn't be another Dark Souls, you're going to be entirely satisfied because it is definitely not. In fact, approaching this game like Dark Souls will end up causing you massive amounts of pain. You'll need to forget everything you know about Souls-like games and relearn from the ground up to competently play this game. But before we get into the details of all that, we have to ask, what is Sekiro? Well, it is somewhat a fantasy take on a Japanese themed world involving a character named Wolf, who is a shinobi for a divine magical boy child brought back to life by magical powers known as the Dragon's Blood, which basically allows people to die and come back over and over and over again. You'll be battling a ton of bosses, and I mean an absolute ton, exploring a network of locations without any guidance whatsoever, and dying a couple hundred or, well, 1,000 times throughout your play. Okay, I gotta get used to the deflecting while fighting. Don't worry, I'll be sure to keep spoilers completely out of my discussion boss-wise, and we'll do the same in the footage, and really only showcase the early ones for you. For starters, Sekiro's graphics are great. FromSoft has never really made an ugly game to my knowledge, quite the opposite really, with Bloodborne being one of the best looking games on the PS4 that has ever been released. Sekiro is no different in that regard, with everything being loaded with incredibly high detail and clearly a ton of effort put into it. The character models, enemies included, are all visually impressive and well done, and the gear that everyone is decked out in is equally detailed. I personally love the complexity of some of the boss equipment and visuals, each one being incredibly unique and stunning in their own regard. All of the animations in-game as well, from visual particle animations to character attacks and movement, are spot on, with none of them being too clunky or janky or anything of the sort. FromSoft has always seemed to get these right, and Sekiro further improves upon that reputation as far as quality goes. Also, oh my god, the execution animations are absolutely fantastic and so amazingly satisfying. Every single enemy gets executed in a specific way, and the blood spatter and effects honestly tickle me in all the right ways. Bosses also execute players with custom animations and cutscenes, so huge props to FromSoft in general for making them so badass. I guess the best way to summarize this with two words would be arterial spray, and it's pretty wicked. The world, too, features multiple diverse locations, each one completely different looking and featuring a different aesthetic than the others. These areas are all extremely inviting to explore, offering players who spend time to really look around some incredible rewards for doing so. I found myself stumbling across path after path that I hadn't noticed in the first time I went to a zone, constantly discovering yet even more in zones I thought I had completely cleared out. It wasn't uncommon for me to find a bonfire I hadn't even known existed before, and I liked the constant feeling of discovery through my play. They even managed to fit in areas that caused a sense of nostalgia for me, reminding me of things like Blighttown, and you'll see what I mean when you get to the Ashina Underground, really nailing the ambience and setting the mood for the enemies you would face in these locations. I will say, however, that they didn't really do much to build lore or story in the world itself. Things like notes, books, side scenarios, and even a lot of the side quests not really being relevant or even around, something that I think FromSoft has done better in the past, and I would have liked to have seen in Sekiro, especially given the fact that it's single player only. I had a lot of questions that I didn't get answers to, and even though that's typical to Dark Souls, with this being single player only, I thought that the chance to expand on things was definitely there, just not taken. Side note real quick, the soundtrack is pretty good, but doesn't come, at least to me, anywhere close to the level that the Souls games did, or more specifically Bloodborne, and I wish that the themes would have been more of a focus for each individual boss. As far as technical stability, Sekiro is mostly rock solid. I personally didn't encounter any FPS loss, crashes, or game corruption on my PC playthrough, which I suggest you do it on PC, 60 FPS rocks, but there were reports of players getting save corruption 8 to 10 hours in, something that would have definitely been frustrating to deal with, but luckily never happened to me. Other than that, it's pretty solid. As a game, it borrows a lot from the previous titles that FromSoft has made, like mostly Dark Souls. Things like bonfires, Estus, and most of the item systems, upgrade materials, etc., but differs drastically in the most important aspect of the game like this, combat. First off, it has decided to rip out the stat system that the previous Dark Souls and other, titles like Bloodborne had, going for a more linear route of difficulty. While this limits the ability for players to do their own thing or style by a pretty substantial amount, it allowed them to design it around a mostly central playstyle, pure skill. I'm not going to beat around the bush at all or sugarcoat it. Sekiro's combat is ridiculously difficult, because most of the enemy fights and all of the boss fights rely entirely on your ability as a player without gimmicks. Souls games were mostly inclusive in the sense that they allowed even an average to bad player to circumvent some of the difficulty by powering up their characters and grinding to bypass a boss they were stuck on. This allowed them to progress through the game and eventually complete it by sheer strength alone, pretty much enabling anyone to enjoy the Dark Souls franchise. Co-op also helped a lot with this substantially. Sekiro is not like that. It is a game with a combat system that is entirely dependent on you learning enemy combat patterns nigh perfectly, and then parrying on a very small window repeatedly in a row to damage their posture and then execute death blows, basically things that are represented by little red pips, health bars, and then kill them. That's right, bosses have multiple health bars and even multiple stages in most fights, requiring you to maintain this level of perfection over multiple stages for a fairly long amount of time. In fact, a lot of the fights are so incredibly difficult, I've seen players stuck on them for 6+ hours, simply dying when they screw up 1 or 2 inputs during a 10-minute fight and having to start over again from the beginning. He just tracked me! Like, he just follows me perfectly. It just fucking murders me. For a lot of people, this sort of high risk, high reward, and extreme satisfaction gameplay is a great thing if you're good at it, and it will provide a sort of high octane and insanely fast paced game of rock, paper, scissors that really shines if you can master it. It almost has sort of a tempo or rhythm to it that you'll come to understand over a dozen or so more hours, and I can't say I've experienced anything quite like it before. If you aren't great though, honestly the combat might feel extremely tedious, unfair, and rage-inducing, and that's where my biggest criticism of the game comes in. Before the comments are bombarded with a "you suck, get good," or "you're just bad at the game," I'm gonna clear the air by saying yes, I beat the game, and yes, I did a lot harder versions of the bosses with the demon bell rung, but even with my ability to do it, I have complaints about what I had to do during the process. I understand what they were trying to accomplish with this being a super player skill-based system. It reminds me a lot of Tenchu or Ninja Gaiden, but I think they went far too much in that direction. It gets to the point of feeling almost like a chore to beat certain bosses and learn mechanics, and with a lot of your deaths feeling like total bullshit rather than "I just screwed up." I really wish there would have been multiple ways to attack a boss, as they had said there would be in previous interviews, especially with prosthetics. We'll get to those in a few, but unfortunately almost every boss just devolves into parry, 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 jump, attack, parry, parry, parry. There aren't any interesting fights involving mechanics, say like using a catapult, or ballistas, or lighting braziers or something to damage demons, or even grappling around to attack weak points. It's almost entirely just get good the game, and although it's badass as hell at times, it did wear old rather quickly if you don't enjoy that style entirely. Regardless of that though, or any of that, as I said, if you can master this system, and you can get used to it, even if it is tedious at times, the game will make you feel more rewarded than anything else that you've ever played. And you'll feel like a complete badass god in the process, so that's something I can totally appreciate. As far as skill systems go, Sekiro has around 5 or so that I'm aware of at this point in time. There might even be hidden ones that nobody knows about. Effectively skill trees that you'll unlock during various points of play, each that offers specific bonus passives or active abilities that slightly vary how you play while running around the world. These can be leveled up through the XP points you get through killing enemies, with skill points taking longer to earn the more you have. As far as I'm aware as of writing this, there's no respec system in the game, so make sure that you choose very wisely and pick precisely what you want, as you're stuck with them forever and it gets punishing to get more later on. The Shinobi prosthetic is a huge focus of Sekiro as well, a mechanical sort of ninja arm that replaces your arm when it's cut off at the beginning of the game. This arm has a plethora of abilities and upgrades that you can unlock for it, ranging from things like a simple axe to break shields to a heavily upgraded flamethrower that will literally send enemies flying several meters. It's pretty freaking awesome, and to be honest, I love some of the variety that it offers. Upgrading your prosthetic will require things like iron ore, gunpowder, and even pieces related to bosses at certain points, allowing you to eventually get some of the abilities of the bosses you fight in combat, like Lady Butterfly's butterflies, adding a unique flair to how you play against standard enemies and even mini bosses. I will say that prosthetics, with the exception of a few cheese strategies like using firecrackers, really take a backseat when you're fighting bosses, as a vast majority of them will only serve to get you killed because they have a fairly large activation time. Other than that, they're totally freaking awesome and remind me heavily of Switch weapons from Bloodborne, which I loved. I mean, heck, they straight took a few of the sounds from Bloodborne and used them on the prosthetics, like the axe, and that was cool to experience. Overall, the game will run, well, depending on how good you are, pretty entirely, at around 25 to 30 hours in length, with plenty of bosses and even a New Game Plus mode for you to experience. On top of that, there's a difficulty modifier mechanic that will actually make the game harder, called the Demon Bell if you're a masochist. So if for some reason the game wasn't hard enough, you could get a hate boner for yourself and play it that way. All in all, Sekiro is an entirely satisfying experience that lives up to the reputation FromSoft has built for themselves, and I can entirely recommend it to anyone that wants an immensely challenging experience that will definitely feel rewarding when you beat it. It was one of the hardest games mechanically I've ever had to master, and at times I thought it was a bit too much, but it didn't ruin the rest of the game for me in the slightest. Because of all this, it gets an extremely strong, if not the highest 8 out of 10 I could possibly give. Had they added more lore, more world building, and alternate intended playstyle methods to beating bosses, I could have easily seen this as being a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. It's a great game, beyond a doubt. Also, as a side note, for all those people running around and saying this game is easier than Dark Souls or Bloodborne, you're absolutely full of dookie, and stop attacking the poor people who are having a hard time, because you and I both know you died just as much as they did. That's going to be it for this rapid fire style review. If you liked it, do me a solid and hit that like button, and if you're already subscribed, ring the bell to get notifications on new videos we post in the future. Oh yeah, and if you like the rapid fire reviews and would like to see when I'm doing them live on Twitch, you can head over to my Twitter at AJSADelrith and give me a follow. I'd appreciate it. Until the next video, this is Delrith, and I'll be seeing ya.